The first flash of the night was the sound of a glass breaking. "Careful, ma'am," the waiter muttered, bending to pick up the shards. I reached down to help him, the hem of my navy dress brushing the marble floor. "It's all right," I said, though my hand trembled just a little. Around us, laughter swelled again. Too bright, too sweet, like perfume sprayed to hide something sour. Someone at the far end of the table whispered, "Such a sweet woman, but she looks poor." The words brushed my skin like cold wind. I felt them, every syllable, but I didn't flinch. I smoothed the napkin over my lap, lifted my chin, and smiled. I should have cried, but I smiled instead. Small, polite, the kind that says you cannot touch me without my permission. Maybe that was my mistake. Smiling when they wanted me to shrink. Or maybe it was my victory. Either way, I stayed still. The light from the chandeliers scattered across the silverware, so bright it hurt my eyes. The restaurant hummed with soft jazz, the kind that pretends to be effortless. Erin, my daughter-in-law, sat at the head of the table, her bracelets catching the glow each time she moved. She loved this kind of place, the reservation list, the way people lowered their voices to sound important. I was her project tonight. The humble mother-in-law brought out for display, proof that her husband had risen above his beginnings. She introduced me to the guests with the same tone she used for the floral arrangements, appreciative, distant, rehearsed. I folded my hands, fingers steady from decades of real work. My purse sat beside my chair, leather softened by time, a quiet witness to every bill paid on faith. I looked around, velvet drapes, wine glasses lined like soldiers, and faces so polite they felt paper thin. They smiled too much, the kind of smiles that carry judgment like jewelry, visible, glittering, heavy. My son, Daniel, reached for his water and gave me a small nod. I caught the flicker of guilt in his eyes, the way he wished I could blend in. He had forgotten that blending in was never my goal. Surviving was. When the bread basket came, I broke a piece, buttered it with calm precision. Bread has always been honest. It doesn't pretend. It never lies about what it costs to make. I listened to their talk, vacations, stocks, whose kid got into which school. The words passed over me like a foreign language. I used to measure days in tips and overtime, not dividends and auctions. Still, I listened, because silence teaches. The woman beside me leaned closer, the scent of roses and champagne clinging to her hair. "You're so sweet," she said. "Erin is lucky to have you. You remind me of my grandmother. She was simple too." Simple. The word landed soft and sharp at once. I took a sip of water, let it cool the burn in my throat. "Thank you," I said. That was all. Inside, though, something shifted. I remembered my mother's voice in a kitchen thick with steam. "Dignity isn't for sale, child. Keep it polished, even when your hands are cracked." So I sat a little straighter. The waiter returned to pour more wine. I declined with a nod. My hands stayed on the table, open, visible. When people expect shame, calm confuses them. Across the table, Erin laughed too loudly at someone's joke. Her laugh sounded like glass, fragile, expensive, already cracking. The music changed. A new song began, slow, rich with piano. For a moment, I closed my eyes. The melody tugged something deep. Nights long ago when I worked in a diner, humming to keep from crying, serving plates heavier than my dreams. Those years taught me the same lesson I felt pulsing now, that the quietest people often carry the loudest truths. When I opened my eyes, I caught sight of the waiter I'd helped earlier. He was watching me, curious maybe, or grateful. I gave him a small nod, a gesture only he saw. Dignity travels quietly between those who recognize it. "Isn't this place lovely?" Erin said, her voice tight with performance. "It is," I answered. My tone was even, gentle. But my heart whispered, "Beauty isn't always kind." She smiled, relieved I hadn't embarrassed her. Around us, the guests raised glasses, toasting to something I didn't catch. I lifted mine anyway, joining in the motion, but not the meaning. Under the shimmer and chatter, A strange calm settled in my chest. I realized I wasn't the one out of place here. They were. Their comfort depended on my silence, and I had learned to make silence my stage. I set my glass down carefully. The world around me glittered like a performance about to end, and I could feel the first ripple of change moving toward us. I didn't know yet what form it would take, only that the air itself felt different, thicker, expectant, like a curtain about to rise. They watched me the way people watch an unfamiliar painting. Tilted heads, polite interest, quiet judgment hiding behind compliments. The table glimmered with forced elegance, but I could feel the tremor underneath it, the tension that grows when politeness becomes performance. Every motion I made seemed to echo. The clink of my spoon, the fold of my napkin, even the way I breathed, measured, quiet, seemed to draw their eyes. I didn't resent them for looking. People fear what doesn't fit their script. Erin's laughter sliced through the hum again, a little louder than before. She was narrating some story about a charity gala, her hand brushing Daniel's sleeve, her smile straining. I saw her glance toward me between sentences, checking that I hadn't spilled a truth she'd tried so hard to hide, that she'd married a man raised by a waitress, not a legacy. The woman across from me leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "You don't say much, do you?" she asked, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "I say what's needed," I replied, and smiled. Her eyes flickered. Surprise first, then retreat. It's hard to fight a calm voice. The waiter returned with appetizers, small and perfect as jewelry. The smell of seared butter filled the air. I thanked him quietly, but no one else did. They were too busy admiring the plating, the symmetry of things meant to be eaten quickly, but admired forever. I tasted one bite, and memory uncurled in my mouth. Years of cooking for others, feeding children on scraps, stretching flavor out of patience. Luxury, I thought, isn't the price of the plate. It's the peace of not needing to prove you belong at the table. A woman in a pearl shawl turned toward Erin. "Your mother-in-law is charming," she said sweetly. "So poised." Erin smiled, relieved. "She's always been like that," she replied. But the tremor in her tone betrayed a truth. She didn't understand where my poise came from, and that unsettled her. Daniel reached for his glass, avoiding my eyes again. I could almost hear his thoughts, gratitude, guilt, love, confusion, all tangled. I let him have them. Some understandings arrive in silence, not confrontation. The conversations rose and fell like tides. Business, renovations, whose child had secured an internship that cost more than my first car. I kept listening, letting the words pass over me like wind through curtains. From the corner of my eye, I caught the waiter watching again, subtle, curious. Maybe he'd recognize something familiar, the quiet endurance of someone used to being unseen. When our eyes met, I nodded once. He straightened, shoulders squaring a little. Even small gestures can give people back their height. Erin turned to me suddenly. "Mom, you've worked in restaurants before, haven't you?" Her voice was casual, but her eyes weren't. "Yes," I said simply. "Oh?" said one of the men, dabbing his mouth with his napkin. "Where?" "A small place outside of town," I said. "Long ago." "Really?" another chimed in. "What did you do there?" "Whatever needed doing." I smiled. "Work teaches you humility, doesn't it?" No one answered. The air paused, just long enough for self-reflection to start itching. Erin took a hurried sip of her drink, her bracelets clinking. "Well," she said brightly, "Mom retired years ago. Now she just enjoys her garden." I nodded, rescuing her from her own discomfort. "Yes," I said softly. "The earth is easier to understand than people sometimes." That earned a few polite laughs, relieved laughter, the kind that says, "crisis averted." But beneath the laughter, I felt the faint shift of power. They didn't know it, but they'd already begun to listen differently. The air that had once pressed down on me now leaned toward me, curious. I looked around the table again, and for the first time, their stares didn't feel heavy. They felt small. People who need to prove their worth always do it with noise. Mine sat quietly in my chest, solid as stone. The waiter cleared plates, moving closer to my side. "Everything all right, ma'am?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Everything's fine." And it was. Not perfect, not polished, but fine in the truest sense, steady, unbroken, real. As conversation swelled again, I sat back and let the light from the chandeliers wash over me. The brightness no longer hurt. It simply reminded me that even under scrutiny, some things refuse to fade. Erin sparkled that night as if her marriage were a mirror she had to keep polished. Her every gesture shimmered with effort. The careful tilt of her wineglass, the laughter half a second too late, the way she leaned in toward wealth as if it might rub off on her sleeves. I watched her quietly, the way a mother watches a child still learning how to walk on marble floors. It's a dangerous surface. It looks beautiful, but one wrong step, and you fall hard. At first, when she'd married Daniel, I believed she wanted a family. Later, I realized she wanted a picture, something to hang on the wall of her ambitions. The dinner was her masterpiece, the right guests, the right restaurant, the right mood music. She had designed the evening down to the color of the candles. I was the one variable she couldn't control. Her voice glided across the table, charming, confident. "When Daniel and I were in Aspen last month," she began, and every head turned. She talked about snow and private chefs, about investment friends and plans to renovate their kitchen with imported marble. I listened, not out of envy, but curiosity. People reveal themselves most when they're trying to impress. Daniel smiled beside her, proud and tired all at once. I could tell he wanted her to feel validated, that he thought her shine somehow reflected on him. He hadn't yet learned that peace shines quieter than money ever could. When the waiter refilled her glass, she thanked him with that gentle tone reserved for service staff, a tone that said, "I see you, but not too much." I recognized it instantly. It's the language of those who fear proximity to struggle. I used to hear it from customers who called me dear, but never looked me in the eye. "Erin," I said softly, when her story about Aspen ended, "you've built quite a life for yourself." Her eyes flicked to mine, uncertain whether to take it as praise or as question. "We've worked hard," she said quickly. "I know," I replied. "That's why it means something." Her relief came like exhale, and she smiled again. I smiled too, but differently. Mine came from understanding, not approval. The woman beside her chimed in. "Erin told us Daniel's mother was always so supportive." Erin nodded too fast. "She is," she said. "She's been through a lot, but she's always so positive." It sounded like a eulogy given to someone still alive. I folded my napkin slowly. "Positivity's easy when you've seen the worst and learned it doesn't win," I said lightly. The man across from me chuckled, thinking it was a joke. Erin looked down at her plate. She was learning, slowly, that my silence wasn't weakness. It was refusal. Refusal to compete, to justify, to perform. I didn't envy her stage. I pitied how exhausting it must be to hold applause in place of peace. A waiter placed the next course before us, the aroma of rosemary and garlic, soft in the air. Erin complimented the presentation, her voice silky. She wanted the owner to hear, to notice her refinement. She didn't know that the owner already had a different kind of noticing waiting at the door. When Daniel leaned toward me to ask if I liked the food, I told him yes, though I barely tasted it. My hunger wasn't for flavor. It was for truth. The room was full of polished lies, gleaming and brittle. Erin's laughter rose again, bright and nervous. "Mother," she said suddenly, as though testing me, "don't you think it's wonderful how far Daniel's come?" Her tone carried a message beneath it. "See, everyone, I helped him climb." I met her gaze gently. "He's always been climbing," I said. "He just needed a place to rest sometimes." The table went quiet for a heartbeat. Daniel looked at me, emotion flickering in his eyes. Erin reached for her drink, the ice clinking too loud. I hadn't meant to wound her. I only wanted truth to breathe. But truth, even softly spoken, can sound like thunder in a room built on pretense. When conversation finally resumed, I sat back and watched Erin recover her rhythm. She smiled at guests, adjusted her earrings, retold another story about her success at work. She was graceful in her own way, a dancer balancing pride and fear. I realized then that she wasn't cruel. She was terrified. Terrified of being ordinary. Terrified of the silence that comes when applause stops. And in that understanding, some part of my heart softened. Because I've known that fear too, the hunger to be seen, the worry that kindness isn't enough. As plates cleared and laughter returned, I caught my reflection in the silverware. Calm, steady, unbothered. She could keep her shine. I would keep my peace. The longer I sat at that table, the more two worlds pulled at me, the one that raised me and the one that tolerated me tonight. Erin's friends laughed about ski resorts and private tutors, words rolling off their tongues like currency. I nodded when expected, but my thoughts drifted elsewhere, to a kitchen with peeling paint and a clock that always ran 5 minutes slow, where I once packed Daniel's lunches in brown paper bags and promised him life would get easier if he just stayed kind. That kitchen still lived in me. Its hum was steady, its honesty unpolished. The scent of coffee grounds and laundry detergent had been my luxury then. Even now, I could almost hear the click of the stove, the hiss of something boiling over. Those sounds had been my symphony. Across the table, a man in a tailored suit spoke about opportunity as though it were a gift you simply unwrapped. I wanted to tell him that opportunity was something you earned with blistered hands and sleepless nights, that luck rarely knocks on doors without a little pushing. But I said nothing. My silence had more edge than any argument. I looked at Erin again, her earrings catching light, her shoulders straight as if posture could prove belonging. I thought about the first time Daniel brought her home. She'd been kind enough, nervous but proud. I'd made stew that night, the recipe my mother passed down. Simple, filling, honest. Erin had smiled politely but eaten little. "It's very rustic," she'd said afterward. Rustic. I'd smiled and thanked her. Tonight, watching her measure every move, I realized she wasn't ungrateful. She was lost in translation between worlds, mine and hers. In hers, everything was about display. In mine, survival didn't need decoration. The waiter poured more water. The crystal caught the chandelier's glow, scattering light across my hands. I turned them over in my lap, lined, scarred, strong. Hands that had scrubbed floors, kneaded dough, stitched tears in uniforms. Hands that had held Daniel's fevered head when he was small. I wasn't ashamed of them, though Erin sometimes winced when I mentioned the work they'd done. It struck me then, people like these guests hid their fatigue behind polish, while women like me carried our stories on our skin. I preferred mine visible. Someone at the end of the table was talking about charity. "We sponsor scholarships for underprivileged kids," a woman said proudly. "It's important to give back." I wanted to ask her who she was giving back to, but I stayed quiet. Dignity doesn't correct. It reveals. My eyes wandered to the waiter again, the young one I'd helped earlier. He was balancing 3 plates, careful but calm. His name tag read Raphael. The name suited him, solid, old world. I recognized that look in his eyes, the quiet determination of someone who knows that being invisible doesn't mean being small. When our eyes met again, I smiled. He smiled back. It was quick, discreet, but real. In that tiny exchange, something inside me steadied. No amount of chandeliers could outshine what it felt like to be seen without judgment. Erin's laughter brought me back. She was showing photos on her phone now, slides of their home, granite countertops, a marble foyer. The guests murmured admiration. "You have such impeccable taste," one said. Erin glowed under their praise, and for a second I saw the little girl she must have once been, the one who learned to equate love with approval. My frustration softened again into something like sorrow. I had chased survival, she chased acceptance. Different hunger, same ache. When the conversation turned to travel, I joined in just once. "I've never been far," I said, "but the best place I ever visited was the coast when Daniel was small. We couldn't afford a hotel, so we camped by the beach." He built castles out of wet sand and cried when the tide took them. The man across from me smiled politely. "Children are sentimental like that," he said. "I was too," I replied, and took a sip of water. The moment passed, but something in the air shifted again, small, almost invisible, yet real. They looked at me differently now, not quite sure whether to pity or admire. I didn't need either. As plates changed hands and candles burned lower, I thought about how strange it was that wealth can feel so fragile. These people had everything that glitters, yet their peace seemed rented, due to expire at any moment. Mine, though humble, was paid in full. When the waiter refilled my glass one last time, he whispered, "You remind me of my mother." I smiled. "Then she raised you right." He grinned shyly before hurrying off, and I felt the faint warmth of recognition settle over me again. The music shifted to something slower, softer. Erin was still performing, her charm a carefully wrapped gift that never quite opened. But for the first time that evening, I didn't see her as an enemy. I saw her as a mirror, a reflection of a woman still trying to believe that worth needs proof. I folded my napkin, smoothing its edges. Inside me, two worlds touched, not fighting, but acknowledging each other. Maybe that was the beginning of peace, not erasing where you came from, but letting it sit beside where you are, without shame. The longer the dinner went on, the more I realized that silence has its own language. It isn't emptiness, it's power translated softly. Every time I chose not to answer, someone else filled the space with nervous words, afraid of what quiet might expose. I'd lived long enough to know that the loudest rooms often belong to the most fragile hearts. Tonight proved it again. Across from me, the man in the suit was explaining investment portfolios to a woman who pretended to understand. His voice filled the air like static, confident, hollow, constant. Erin laughed at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. I just smiled and watched the way she leaned toward him, as though agreement could buy her a sense of belonging. My silence, though, began to bother them. People like these don't know what to do with stillness. They mistake it for judgment. One woman cleared her throat and asked, "Mrs. Harper, you're so quiet. Are we boring you?" I set my fork down carefully. "Not at all," I said. "I'm listening." She blinked. "To what?" "To everything," I replied, and smiled again. The table laughed politely, but I noticed how no one met my eyes afterward. It's easier to dismiss someone when you think she isn't paying attention. Harder when you realize she hears everything. Inside, I was calm. I'd spent years learning to hold my peace in rooms where I wasn't invited to speak. At work, at banks, at parent-teacher meetings, I'd discovered that restraint could be armor, and that silence, when worn with grace, could turn into glass that reflects rather than absorbs cruelty. Erin reached for her glass. Her bracelets clinked, a nervous rhythm. "Mom always takes her time," she said lightly, trying to smooth the moment. "She's thoughtful like that." Thoughtful. That was her word for unpredictable. She feared what I might say almost as much as she feared my quiet. I understood. Truth has a way of making delicate things tremble. I took another bite of the lamb, still warm, perfectly tender. "You've chosen a beautiful place, Erin," I said. "Everything's flawless." Relief softened her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, and her smile looked real for the first time all evening. "But beauty," I added, "can be dangerous. It makes people forget what's real." She blinked, unsure whether I'd meant it as compliment or warning. I didn't clarify. Some lessons grow best in ambiguity. The waiter approached to clear the plates, his movements efficient but gentle. I saw the way he glanced at my half-finished meal, maybe wondering if something was wrong. I nodded slightly to reassure him. He smiled and moved on. The small exchange grounded me again. Two workers speaking the same invisible dialect of endurance. Erin's guests continued their chatter, louder now, trying to fill the night with noise again. One woman described her husband's promotion. Another complained about her maid's vacation request. I let their words drift by. The more they spoke, the less they seemed to know themselves. Daniel leaned closer. "You all right?" he asked softly. I'm fine, I said. I've been fine a long time. He looked at me like he wanted to ask more but didn't dare. That restraint, too, was love. Quiet, awkward, real. When dessert menus arrived, I declined again. The waiter hesitated. Nothing at all, ma'am. Just coffee, I said. Black. Around the table, the others ordered elaborate sweets, soufflés, truffles, pastries with names longer than their flavors. Erin ordered the same as the woman beside her, careful not to stand out. I wondered if she even knew what she liked anymore. As the plates arrived, conversation picked up again, sugary and shallow. I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the aroma rise like memory. I remembered other coffees, cheap, burnt, gulped between shifts. This one tasted smoother, but no truer. The woman in pearls leaned toward me. You seem so composed, she said. If anyone had called me poor, I'd have walked out. I looked at her gently. Sometimes leaving isn't strength, I said. Sometimes staying is. Her face softened. I never thought of it that way. Most people don't, I replied. My words lingered longer than I expected. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Erin's laughter faltered. I wasn't trying to teach them anything, but truth, when spoken quietly, finds its way to the corners of every room. The pianist in the corner began a slower tune. Candlelight bent closer, shadows stretching across the table like confessions. I took one last sip of my coffee and set the cup down. My silence wasn't armor anymore. It was invitation. Let them see what calm looks like when it refuses to break. And though no one noticed it yet, I could feel something shifting behind the scenes of this dinner. The slow gathering of an unseen tide. The beginning of the moment when silence would finally speak for me. The scent of coffee lingered long after the waiter cleared my cup. It pulled me backward, past chandeliers and linen, into a smaller world, a place that smelled of grease and rain, where the tables wobbled and the air carried the hum of survival. The first restaurant I ever worked in didn't have crystal glasses or imported plates. It had chipped mugs and paper menus, a jukebox that skipped on the same song, and a boss who paid in cash every Friday night. The place sat just off Highway 41, where truckers stopped for pie and worn-out travelers counted their last dollars before heading west. I was younger then, newly widowed, terrified, and stubborn. I'd shown up in the middle of a snowstorm, asking for work because rent was due, and Daniel needed shoes that didn't leak. The owner, a kind man named Luis, had handed me an apron still warm from the dryer. "Can you carry a tray?" he'd asked. "I can carry a family," I'd answered. He smiled and said, "Then this'll be easy." Those years carved the backbone of who I became. The shifts were long, the tips unpredictable, but the dignity was constant. I learned to remember faces, to listen when customers talked about nothing, because nothing is often where loneliness hides. I learned how to stand 12 hours straight and still find a way to be kind. Sometimes, during slow afternoons, Luis would sit at the counter, his hands stained with coffee, and talk about opening a real restaurant one day, a place with cloth napkins and real silver. "You'll come work for me then, Mrs. Harper," he'd say, half teasing, half dreaming. "I'll come as a guest," I'd reply, laughing, "when I can afford to eat somewhere that serves dessert without counting the cost." He used to call me Maestra, teacher, because I showed him how to keep customers coming back, remember their names, their favorite pie, their stories. I didn't know it then, but that advice would become his foundation. Years later, he disappeared from my life, off chasing his dream. I never knew if he made it, until tonight. At the far end of this glittering room, I could sense movement, the kind that precedes change. The staff was whispering near the entrance, a quiet wave of attention shifting from the tables to the doorway. I didn't turn yet. I let the moment build, the way you let a memory find you before you chase it. For a breath, I was back behind that old diner counter, wiping plates with a towel too thin, listening to Luis talk about a restaurant filled with music and light. He'd always said, "People think success is a door you open. It's not. It's a floor you mop until it shines enough for others to walk on." I smiled at the thought, tracing my finger along the rim of my glass. If only he could see this place, I thought. If only he knew that his words had followed me all these years. And maybe, just maybe, he was closer than I realized. Erin's voice snapped me back to the present. "Mom," she said, "you've gone quiet again." "I was just remembering," I said. "Good memories?" she asked, trying to sound interested. "The best kind," I replied. "The ones that taught me who I am." She frowned slightly, not understanding, but nodded anyway. The guests had moved on to a new topic: art galleries or foundations, something that smelled of money but not meaning. I drifted again, softly, to that diner with its flickering neon sign that read, "Open even when it shouldn't have been." In that small, tired place, people found me worth noticing. Here, surrounded by wealth, I was invisible. Yet somehow the diner had felt grander, its laughter real, its warmth unperformed. I didn't resent this new world. I simply saw through it. As I took another sip of water, I felt the pull of destiny weaving its quiet thread through time. Somewhere in this room, I thought, the past was waiting to be recognized. I didn't know what was coming, but something inside me whispered that the story I had once lived in grace and kindness was about to step into this gleaming hall. And when it did, it would remind them all that class isn't a label, it's conduct remembered. The music faded mid-song, as if even the pianist had sensed the sudden pause in the air. A subtle ripple moved through the restaurant, waiters straightening their jackets, guests turning toward the entrance, voices falling into whispers. I didn't turn right away. I've learned not to chase attention. It finds you soon enough when it means to. I sipped my water, still and deliberate, feeling the pulse of the room change shape. Then I heard it, a familiar cadence in a voice I hadn't heard in decades. Warm, certain, grounded. "Good evening, friends," he said. My heart stalled. I knew that voice the way you know an old hymn. You forget the words, but never the tone. He moved through the room with quiet authority, greeting tables, shaking hands. Not the kind of charm that demands notice, but the kind that gives it. People's faces softened when he spoke to them. The staff stood taller. I set my glass down carefully and turned. It was him, Luis. Older now, silver touching his temples, but his walk still carried that same rhythm, the one that once matched the shuffle of trays and dishes in our diner. My breath caught. I hadn't imagined he'd come this far. He wore a tailored jacket, not flashy, just clean and certain, like a man who knows where he belongs. And then suddenly, his eyes found me. For a split second, confusion flickered, as if his mind was rearranging time. Then recognition hit. His face softened. "Mrs. Harper?" he said. The name slipped through the air, sharp enough to cut every conversation short. Forks froze mid-air. Laughter stilled. Even the chandelier seemed to listen. Erin blinked, startled. Daniel looked between us, confused. "You know each other?" he asked. Luis smiled, wide, genuine, unguarded. "Know her?" he said, and his voice carried easily, full of warmth. "This woman taught me everything I know about work that means something." I felt every pair of eyes swing toward me, the weight of disbelief hanging in the air. I wanted to look down, to retreat, but old habits die when pride lives long enough. So I sat straighter, meeting his gaze. He walked over, unhurried, each step measured, certain. "You used to tell me, if you can make someone feel seen, you'll never serve just food, you'll serve comfort. You remember that?" I did. I remembered the night I'd said it, exhausted, trying to keep him from quitting after a bad review. "You listened?" I asked softly. "I built an empire on it," he said. The table fell utterly still. Erin's friends looked between us as if watching a curtain pull back on a play they didn't audition for. Erin's face paled. "This is your old boss?" she asked, the question small, almost breaking. Luis shook his head gently. "No," he said. "If anything, she was mine." The words landed like a blessing and a reckoning all at once. I tried to speak, but my throat caught. "Luis, He stopped me with a raised hand. "You have no idea what it means to see you here," he he said. This restaurant, this life, it started in that little diner we worked in. I swore if I ever made it, I'd build a place where people like us would never be treated as less. I blinked, tears warming behind my lashes but refusing to fall. I'd promised myself long ago that gratitude would never look like weakness. You've done beautifully, I said. He smiled, lowering his voice just enough for only our table to hear. Because you showed me how to. Around us, murmurs began, guests whispering, processing the revelation. The woman in pearls sat straighter, her earlier smugness cracking. Daniel stared, pride blooming slowly across his face. Aaron's mouth opened, then closed again, words lost. Luis turned toward her, kind but firm. Your mother-in-law, he said, is one of the finest people I've ever known. Silence stretched, wide and shimmering. I didn't feel it. That was the thing about truth. It never rushes. It just stands, undeniable. Luis nodded to the staff, then looked back at me. May I? He asked, motioning toward my chair. I rose before he could pull it out. You already did enough, I said. He chuckled softly, the sound carrying warmth across the table. You haven't changed, he murmured, still as steady as ever. I had to be, I said. He touched his chest lightly, a silent salute, before moving to greet other guests. But I saw the glimmer in his eyes, respect that needed no words. When I sat back down, Aaron's friends looked at me differently. So did she, but I stayed quiet. I didn't need to explain how small kindnesses echo longer than applause. The proof had just walked through the door. Luis didn't go far before the room began to pull him back toward me. The murmur of curiosity swelled like a tide, waiters whispering, guests exchanging glances, the sound of wealth growing uneasy in the presence of humility revealed. He turned toward the center of the dining room, clearing his throat softly. The pianist stilled his hands, sensing the shift. Conversations melted away. I didn't plan to interrupt your evening, Luis began, his voice low but sure. But I see someone here tonight who deserves more recognition than I ever gave her. Every face turned to follow his gaze, straight to me. I wanted to disappear and stand taller all at once. The instinct to hide fought with the ache of long-delayed validation. I clasped my hands in my lap, the way I used to do during rush hours when exhaustion threatened to show. Luis continued. When I was a dishwasher in a diner years ago, I wanted to quit almost every week. I thought success was for people who looked a certain way, spoke a certain way. He paused, his eyes steady on mine. Then there was this woman, Mrs. Harper, who told me that respect isn't something you earn after success. It's something you carry through failure. A breath rippled through the room. Someone near the bar muttered softly, "That's beautiful." Luis smiled faintly. I didn't understand it then. But years later, when I opened my first restaurant, I realized every decision I made, the way we treat our staff, the way we greet our guests, the food we serve, it all came from that truth. He stepped closer, speaking not to me but to everyone. You see, this place exists because someone believed kindness could survive ambition. I just built walls around her words. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Then, quiet applause began. Tentative, then growing. I didn't look up. I wasn't made for applause, I was made for work. But still, something inside me trembled. The good kind of trembling, like a locked door easing open. Aaron's friends clapped with that slow, unsure rhythm of people realizing they've misjudged. Daniel looked at me, eyes glistening. Erin herself stayed still, her lips parted slightly as though trying to breathe in a truth she didn't yet know how to name. Luis turned toward me fully now. "Mrs. Harper," he said softly, "I never thanked you. You believed in me before I believed in myself. I found my voice, thinner than I'd expected. You did all the work, Luis. I just reminded you who you were." He smiled, that old grin I remembered from tired mornings when we'd split leftover pie at dawn. And that was everything. The guests began murmuring again, but differently now, gentler, respectful. The same woman who'd called me sweet but poor lowered her eyes, her hand trembling as she reached for her drink. Luis glanced at Aaron's table, then back to me. "I'd be honored if you'd visit the kitchen before you go," he said. "Some of the staff have heard stories about a woman who once ran a diner floor like a ship. I think they'd like to see the captain." The room laughed softly, the warmth returning. My face flushed, not from embarrassment, but from the rare, strange pleasure of being seen without disguise. When he walked away, I could still feel his gratitude trailing behind him like music. I looked down at my napkin, tracing its edge, grounding myself again. Recognition is powerful, but it's dangerous too. It tempts you to forget that worth existed long before anyone noticed. I wouldn't let it change me. Erin leaned in slightly, her voice small. "You never told us you worked with him." "There wasn't a reason to," I said. "Some memories don't need to prove themselves." Her eyes glistened. "He respects you so much." "I respect him too," I replied. "We came from the same storm." She nodded, silent, her lips trembling with something that looked like shame or understanding, or both. The applause had faded, but a different kind of quiet had settled in its place. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was reverent. As the waiter passed, I caught his sleeve lightly. "He's a good man," I said, nodding toward Luis. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. "But you're the reason he is." That sentence lingered even after the waiter walked away. It didn't swell my pride, it humbled it. Because dignity isn't about being celebrated. It's about being remembered for the right reasons. And for the first time in years, I felt remembered. For a long while after Luis walked away, the room stayed suspended in that fragile stillness that follows truth. No one quite knew what to say next. Forks hovered midair, laughter tried to restart but never found its rhythm. Even the pianist, sensing something sacred, let the keys rest under his fingers. I looked around the table, watching their faces soften one by one. The same people who had smiled too wide earlier were now shrinking into themselves, searching for the right expression, respect, maybe, or regret. Silence can be cruel when it exposes, but it can also be kind when it teaches. Tonight, it was both. The woman in pearls looked at me and smiled, this time without performance. "That was extraordinary," she said. "You must be very proud." "I'm grateful," I replied. Pride fades faster than gratitude. Her lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to say more, but she only nodded and turned back to her plate. Daniel reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. "I didn't know, Mom," he whispered. "I never told you," I said. "Some things don't need telling. They just live in who we become." He squeezed my hand. "I see that now." Erin was quiet, her posture smaller than before, her eyes unfocused as she stirred her untouched dessert. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't seem to be performing for anyone. "I should have known," she said softly, barely audible. "I've spent so much time trying to impress people who wouldn't even notice what really matters." I didn't answer right away. I wanted her words to settle into the space they deserved. "You see it now," I said finally. "That's enough." She looked at me, eyes glistening. "I'm sorry." I nodded. Apology accepted. Understanding is the harder part, but you're on your way. Her lips trembled into a small smile, shy and genuine. It was the first real thing she'd shown me all evening. Around us, the dinner resumed in hesitant waves. Someone made a toast to unexpected blessings. Another commented that Luis's story was inspiring. The laughter that followed was quieter this time, honest, almost human. I sat back, watching the way people avoided each other's eyes when they spoke. They were looking inward now, seeing themselves reflected in the story they'd just heard. That's what silence does when you carry it right. It turns into a mirror. The waiter passed again, setting a small glass of sparkling water by my hand. "From the owner," he whispered. I smiled, thanked him softly, and raised it slightly toward the room. Not a toast, just acknowledgement. A gesture that said, "We all learned something tonight." My reflection rippled in the water, the candlelight flickering across it like forgiveness. I caught my own gaze in that trembling image, older, wiser, steady. The girl who once feared invisibility had become the woman who didn't need to be seen to know her worth. At the far end of the room, Luis reappeared, speaking quietly with a couple near the door. When he noticed me watching, he touched his heart lightly with his hand. A silent thank you. I returned the gesture, equally wordless. The guests resumed their chatter, but it was softer now, stripped of its sharp edges. Even their laughter sounded different, less brittle, more whole. Erin leaned toward me again. "Mom," she said, "I didn't just want to impress them. I wanted to prove I belonged." "You already did," I told her. "Just not the way you thought." She looked at me like she wanted to cry but didn't. Instead, she reached for her glass and raised it slightly toward me. I returned the gesture with the faintest nod. It was enough. I could feel the heaviness in the room shifting, the same way the tide pulls away from the shore once the storm has passed. Across the table, the woman who had whispered about me earlier caught my eye. She mouthed a single word, "Sorry." I smiled back. Not to absolve her, but to release her. Some debts are better settled through grace than pride. The pianist began to play again, soft, slow, almost reverent. The melody floated around the chandeliers and rested on our table like blessing. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the music move through me. The noise, the judgment, the pity, all of it had quieted. What remained was the echo of something pure. When I opened my eyes, I felt lighter. Not because the world had changed, but because I had witnessed it try. And that was enough for one night. Luis returned to our table not long after the room had quieted, his eyes soft, his steps unhurried. He rested one hand on the back of a chair, scanning the guests who had gathered near enough to listen, without pretending otherwise. "I wasn't planning to tell this story tonight," he began, "but sometimes gratitude waits years to find the right voice." The table stilled again, forks forgotten, champagne half raised. Luis smiled faintly. "When I first met Mrs. Harper, I was 20 and angry at everything. Poverty, long hours, the smell of bleach that never left my hands. I thought dignity belonged only to the rich. Then one night, after a customer yelled at her for bringing the wrong order, she apologized softly, fixed it, and smiled. I asked her why she didn't fight back. She told me, "Because I choose what gets to touch my peace." He looked directly at me now. That night changed my life. I realized the poorest people I knew were the ones who let cruelty own them. A hush rolled through the dining room, deep and complete. Erin's friends exchanged glances, eyes flicking from him to me as though they'd stumbled into a sermon without pews. Luis went on. "I promised myself that if I ever owned a restaurant, it would honor people like her, the ones who make decency look effortless." He paused, letting the words breathe. Years later, when I finally opened my first place, I framed a quote in the kitchen. "Choose what gets to touch your peace." None of my chefs knew who said it, but she did. Laughter rippled softly, reverent. My hands trembled under the table, but I hid them in my lap. Recognition wasn't something I'd ever sought, yet it felt like sunlight reaching a part of me I'd long forgotten existed. Luis gestured toward the staff gathered by the door. "Every person who works here knows that story. They just didn't know the woman behind it was real." The waiters smiled, some nodding, one young man clapping shyly before catching himself. I felt tears pressing behind my eyes, not of pride, but of quiet relief, that my kindness hadn't vanished into time. It had grown roots. The woman who had called me sweet but poor looked away, shame blooming across her face like color returning to stone. Erin kept her eyes on her plate, her breath uneven. Luis rested a hand on the chair beside me. "Mrs. Harper, I owe you more than thanks. You showed me how to build something worth standing for. I think everyone here tonight needed that reminder, including me." I wanted to respond, but the lump in my throat refused to move, so I simply nodded. Sometimes gratitude doesn't need grammar. The pianist began playing again, low and steady. The music threaded through Luis's pause like punctuation. He turned toward the staff. "Tell the kitchen they can close early tonight," he said. "Dinner's on the house." A collective gasp fluttered through the room. "You can't," one of the guests began. But Luis only smiled. "I can. It's the least I can do for the woman who taught me generosity." Applause filled the space again, but this time it sounded different, softer, earned. I looked toward Erin. Her eyes glistened as if she were seeing me for the first time, not the mother-in-law who wore old dresses, but the woman whose past had built her husband's world. She reached for my hand. "Mom," she whispered, "you never said you inspired him." "I didn't know I did," I said, my voice calm. "You don't plant seeds for applause. You plant them to grow shade." Her lips trembled into a fragile smile. "You've been shading us all this time," she said. I squeezed her hand gently. "That's what mothers do." Luis gave a small bow toward me, then turned back to the crowd. "To Mrs. Harper," he said, raising a glass. The guests echoed softly. "To Mrs. Harper," and for once the toast felt clean. No pity, no performance. I raised my own glass, meeting their eyes with calmness that felt centuries old. The wine shimmered under the chandeliers like captured light. I didn't drink it. I only held it, steady, the way you hold something sacred. In that moment, I realized the power of being remembered, not as rich or important, but as good. And as the music swelled again, I could almost hear my mother's voice whispering through the piano notes. "See? Dignity never forgets its children." The toast faded slowly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than applause. People sat differently now, less straight, less guarded, as if the story had loosened their spines. The performance was over. What remained was the rawness of being human, bare and slightly uncomfortable under the light. I could see it in their eyes, the subtle panic that comes when people realize kindness isn't decoration. It's standard. Every smile, every gesture at the table began to falter. The masks that had glimmered earlier now cracked in the dim light. The woman in pearls, the one who'd whispered about me before, reached for her purse as though needing something to do with her hands. Her laughter, once confident, sounded fragile now. "That was a wonderful story," she said weakly. "Very inspiring." I turned to her, my tone soft but even. "It's more than a story. It's a reminder." Her eyes flicked down, unsure whether I'd forgiven her. I had, but forgiveness isn't for the forgiven. It's for the one who decides to stop carrying hurt. Daniel was quiet, pride softening his features. His hand brushed mine under the table, an anchor between the past and what came next. Erin, beside him, looked small. Her shoulders curved inward, the shimmer of her dress dulled under the candlelight. She lifted her napkin, pressing it to her lips as though it could hide her thoughts. Finally, she said, "I didn't know you'd worked with him, Mom. I didn't know any of it." "You didn't ask," I replied gently. Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with realization. I thought I needed to protect our image. But you've been protecting our name all along." I didn't answer. She needed to hear her own words before I softened them. The man across from us tried to restart conversation. "Mrs. Harper, it's rare these days to meet someone who stays humble after success." I smiled faintly. I never left humility, so there was no need to return to it. A ripple of quiet laughter spread, genuine this time. Even Luis, still nearby, chuckled softly. Erin's friends began talking again, but their voices were gentler, stripped of their former gloss. One of them even thanked a waiter without prompting. The change was small, but real. I watched as the evening's glamour began to dissolve into something better. Sincerity. Erin looked around, as though seeing her world for the first time without the lens of validation. "They're all pretending," she whispered. "Every one of them." "Not pretending," I said, "just lost. People mistake noise for meaning when they don't know peace." She stared at me, tears finally spilling. "How do you do it? Stay so calm?" "By remembering that noise dies faster than truth," I said. Let them tire themselves out. Peace will still be standing. She wiped her eyes and let out a trembling laugh. You make it sound simple. It's not, I replied, but it's worth learning. Luis came back briefly to check on us, resting a hand on my shoulder. Everything all right here? Yes, I said. Better than it's been in a long time. He smiled, reading more in my tone than I said aloud. Then he turned to Aaron. Your mother-in-law's calm. It's something most people chase for years and never find. Aaron nodded, swallowing hard. I see that now. Luis excused himself again, heading back toward the kitchen, and the air he left behind felt cleaner, freer. Daniel leaned close. I'm proud of you, Mom. I met his eyes. I've always been proud of you, even when you didn't know it. He smiled softly. You really did teach us without saying a word. That's how lessons last, I said. The plates were cleared, the candles burned low, the diners around us began to drift into their own reflections, each face gentler than before. It wasn't redemption, it was recognition. Sometimes that's enough. When the waiter returned to ask if we wanted coffee or dessert, Erin surprised me. We'll take coffee, she said, her tone quiet but steady. Black, I smiled. You'll like it, I said. She laughed, just a little. I think I already do. The room, once a gallery of judgment, had turned into something resembling fellowship. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The pianist shifted to a slower melody, something almost holy in its simplicity. As the notes lingered in the air, I felt the weight of the evening lift from my shoulders. Masks had fallen, not with drama, but with grace, and the truth standing underneath was softer than I expected. Erin didn't speak for a long time after the plates were cleared. She just sat there, her fingers tracing circles on the white tablecloth, her eyes unfocused, lips pressed tight like someone trying not to cry in public. The energy that once radiated from her, the hunger to be admired, was gone. In its place was something smaller, rawer, closer to truth. Daniel tried to draw her back with a gentle nudge, but she shook her head. I need a moment, she whispered. I didn't rush her. Silence can be medicine when pride is the wound. At last, she looked at me. I feel so foolish, she said, her voice shaking. All night I was trying to make everyone think I was perfect, and then you? She stopped, searching for the right word. You just were. Her honesty startled me. It was the first thing she'd said all evening that didn't sound rehearsed. I wasn't perfect, I said. I just stopped pretending I needed to be. She swallowed hard. You make it look easy. It isn't, but it's lighter than carrying lies. Her laugh cracked halfway through, half sob, half relief. I've been so afraid people would see me as ordinary, she admitted. I wanted them to think I belonged. You do belong, I told her. But not because of the money or the marble countertops. You belong because you love my son. That's enough for me. Her eyes filled. And for him? For him too, I said softly. He just forgot to tell you lately. She let out a trembling sigh. I thought you judged me. I did, I admitted with a smile. But gently. That made her laugh again. Weak, but real. The sound loosened something tight inside her. Around us, the restaurant was settling into quiet contentment. Waiters cleared the last of the dessert plates, the piano drifted into a slow melody, and the night itself seemed to exhale. Erin turned her gaze toward Luis, who was speaking with a small group near the bar. He talked about you like you were some kind of saint. I shook my head. He just remembered me at my best. We all deserve to be remembered that way sometimes. She nodded, then hesitated. I don't think I've ever given you that grace. You will, I said gently. Just start with yourself. Her eyes glistened again. You make it sound so simple. It's not, I said. It's just necessary. We sat in silence for a while. Daniel reached for Erin's hand under the table, his thumb brushing hers in quiet apology. She looked at him, and for the first time that night, there was no performance in her eyes, only tenderness. I watched them, and something inside me softened completely. I realized that what I'd wanted all along wasn't to win or to be recognized. It was to see them find the peace that had taken me a lifetime to learn. Erin leaned toward me again. "Do you hate me for tonight?" she asked, almost childlike. "No," I said. "I understand you. Even after everything?" "Especially after everything." She lowered her head. "You should be angry." "I was," I said. "But anger is heavy, and I've carried enough weight in my life." Her lip trembled. "You make me want to be better." "That's how love works when it's done right," I said. "It doesn't demand. It inspires." She smiled through her tears. "You sound like him," she said, glancing toward Luis. "He sounds like me," I corrected softly, and she laughed again, wiping her cheeks. It was then that the waiter returned with the bill, setting it on the table with an apologetic smile. Erin reached for her purse, but I stopped her. "Don't," I said. "He already said it's taken care of." She paused, realizing the meaning behind the gesture. "Because of you." "Because of kindness," I said. "It travels faster than money ever could." The waiter left, and we sat there a little longer, just breathing in the new quiet between us. It was strange. Peace feels loud when you've gone too long without it. When we finally stood, Erin hesitated again. "Mom?" "Yes?" "I'm sorry for how I've treated you." I touched her arm gently. "And I'm grateful for how you're growing." Her eyes widened a little. "You're really forgiving me?" "I forgave you before you asked," I said. "It's easier to live that way." Outside, through the restaurant's glass doors, the night waited, dark, cool, patient. Erin exhaled, as though leaving behind more than just an evening. "I feel different," she whispered. "You are," I told her. "That's the gift of being uncomfortable. It rearranges you." We walked toward the door, side by side, no longer mother and daughter-in-law performing a part, but two women quietly mending the distance between them. And as we stepped into the soft night air, I thought, forgiveness has its own elegance. It doesn't glitter. It glows. When we returned to the table, something intangible had shifted. The air, once heavy with performance, now carried warmth instead of weight. The candles had burned lower, their flames smaller but steadier, like the evening itself, no longer blazing with pretense, just glowing softly in truth. The conversations had gentled. The laughter, once brittle, now rolled out like a sigh. Even the servers seemed to move differently, no longer rushed but graceful, as if the room itself had exhaled and found its rhythm again. I sat down, watching as Daniel and Erin exchanged a look that didn't need words. It wasn't the glance of a couple keeping up appearances. It was quieter, fuller, an understanding born from humility. I saw in them what I'd hoped for all along, not perfection, but presence. Across the table, the woman in pearls, the one who had first labeled me sweet but poor, cleared her throat softly. "Mrs. Harper," she began, her voice tentative, "I owe you an apology. I spoke thoughtlessly earlier. I didn't mean any harm." I met her gaze and smiled. "I know," I said, "but harm doesn't always mean intent. It's still good to recognize it." She nodded, eyes shining with a humility that looked new on her face. "You're right," she said. "Thank you for being kinder than I deserved." "I just chose what gets to touch my peace," I replied, and Luis's words rippled quietly through the room again, reminding everyone that kindness could have backbone. The pianist's melody softened into something that felt almost like a benediction. One by one, people began to share small truths, stories about their parents, struggles they usually disguised with jokes. It was strange, beautiful, watching masks fall without force. Erin leaned toward me, her voice barely above the music. "Do you hear them?" "I do," I said. "It's like everyone's softer," she whispered. "Truth makes people tender," I told her. "It's the only thing that ever does." She smiled, her hand brushing mine. "You did that." "Maybe," I said. "But I think the story did the work. I just sat still long enough for it to breathe." Luis passed by again, checking on the tables. He caught my eye, and our exchange was silent but full. The look between two people who've carried the same kind of struggle and survived it with grace. He gave me a small nod of respect, one that said, "You did more than you know." The waiter brought fresh coffee for everyone. "Compliments of the house," he said, smiling. Erin looked down at her cup and laughed softly. "I think black coffee's going to taste different to me now." "It always tastes different when you've earned it," I said. Daniel chuckled quietly, squeezing her hand. "You know," he said, "this is the first dinner in years that feels real." Erin nodded. "It's strange, isn't it? How honesty makes food taste better." "It does," I said. "Pretending ruins the appetite." For the first time, the guests around us weren't looking at each other's jewelry or resumes. They were listening. Someone asked Luis about his early days, another about the staff. Laughter bubbled again, but this time it sounded like people sharing air, not competing for it. I caught myself smiling, not from pride, but from relief. For so long I had felt like the outsider, the quiet shadow at the edges of their shining world. But now, the light felt shared. And that's the truest kind of belonging. When the plates were cleared and the music began to fade, Erin turned to me again. "I don't think I'll ever forget this night," she said. "Good," I told her. "Some nights are meant to teach us what all the others are for." "What's this one for?" she asked softly. "For growing up," I said. "All of us." She smiled at that, a smile free of tension, the kind that reaches the eyes and stays there. Outside, rain had begun to fall, soft against the windows. People gathered their coats and purses, speaking to each other more gently than when they'd arrived. Apologies exchanged in glances, small kindnesses passed like salt across a table. The dinner that began with judgment was ending in grace. And as I looked around that room, I thought of how the smallest truth, a few words spoken decades ago, could ripple through a lifetime, turning sharpness into peace. Maybe that's what dignity does. It doesn't shout for recognition. It changes the temperature of a room. And tonight, I could feel the warmth returning everywhere. When the dinner finally ended, the room looked different. Not because the lights had dimmed, but because the eyes that filled it had changed. People spoke softly, shaking hands as they left, carrying something invisible but heavier than their coats. Erin and Daniel lingered by the door, saying polite goodbyes to the remaining guests. Luis stood near the hostess stand, thanking each person as they passed, his tone equal parts gratitude and grace. When he saw me rise, he stepped forward immediately. "You're not leaving without a goodbye, are you?" he asked. "Only until next time," I said. He smiled. "There will be a next time. And it won't be as a guest. It'll be as family." The word family sat gently in the air, heavier than wine, lighter than pride. I reached out and squeezed his hand. "You did what you promised," I said. "You built a place where kindness earns the best seat." "And you gave me the blueprint," he replied. He gestured toward the front wall of the restaurant, a stretch of polished marble gleaming even in low light. "Do you recognize it?" I stepped closer. My fingertips brushed the smooth surface. Beneath the shine, I could see faint, pale veins running through the stone, lines that looked almost like scars. "This marble," Luis said, "came from a quarry near the old diner. I bought it on purpose. I wanted a piece of where we started to live here, too." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I felt time fold neatly in half. The tired woman with cracked hands and the one standing here now, both touching the same dream. I traced one of the marble veins with my finger. It was cold and alive at once. "You remembered everything," I whispered. "I never forgot," he said. I turned back toward him. "Then I'm not the only one who learned how to choose what gets to touch your peace." He smiled. "You taught it to all of us." We stood there in silence for a moment, letting the years speak between us. Then, softly, I said, "Take care of this place, Luis." "I will," he promised, "and I'll make sure your story stays here even when you don't." The words found their place in me like a blessing. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and shining under the streetlights. The city smelled new, clean, forgiving. Erin and Daniel waited by the car, their hands entwined. I walked slowly to the door, pausing once more beside the marble wall. The same cold surface I'd touched decades ago in another life now carried warmth from my palm. I remembered that first night in the old diner, how I'd leaned against a chipped counter and whispered to myself that someday all this struggle would mean something. It did. Not in riches, not in status, but in echoes. The walls of this new place would hold more than laughter and wine. They'd hold the quiet proof that dignity leaves fingerprints wherever it's practiced. Erin turned, her eyes soft. "Ready, Mom?" "Almost," I said. I gave the marble one last touch, like closing a loop I hadn't realized was still open. Then I stepped outside. The cool air met my skin, the sound of the city alive again. Tires on wet pavement, a siren in the distance, a couple laughing under an umbrella. Life continuing, as it always does, unaware that something sacred had just settled in its rhythm. As we walked to the car, Erin slipped her arm through mine. "You okay?" "I'm perfect," I said. And for once, I meant it. The restaurant's door closed behind us with a soft click, and I glanced back just once, the glow from inside catching the marble wall where my hand had rested. It shimmered faintly, almost like it was breathing, and I thought, maybe dignity, like stone, only grows stronger when time tries to wear it down. Outside the restaurant, the city shimmered as if the rain had polished it for us. Cars hissed by on the wet pavement, streetlights painting long ribbons of gold across puddles. Erin walked close beside me, her heels softer now, her laughter quieter, but real. Daniel followed a step behind, holding the umbrella above us, even though the drizzle had stopped. We paused at the corner before crossing. Behind us, the restaurant's windows glowed, a cathedral of warmth and noise, smaller now, but still humming with the echo of truth. I could almost hear the clinking of glasses, the murmur of new conversations that carried pieces of our story. Erin turned to me. "It feels different out here," she said. "It is," I replied. Inside, everyone was looking. Out here, everyone can finally see. She tilted her head, unsure. "See what?" "Themselves," I said simply. We walked on. The rhythm of our steps found an old memory in me, the sound of tired shoes against tile floors in a diner that smelled of burnt coffee and soap. Only now, the sound wasn't exhaustion, it was grace. I stopped halfway down the block, turning back for one last look. Through the glass, I could see Luis at the counter, talking to his staff, his gestures easy, grateful. For a moment, time folded. The boy washing dishes, the woman mopping the floor, the dream neither of us knew we were building. Daniel followed my gaze. "You helped him become who he is," he said. I shook my head. We helped each other survive. The rest was a bonus. He smiled, a quiet acknowledgement that no longer needed to be spoken. Erin reached for his hand, and he took it. There was peace in that simple motion, earned, not borrowed. When we reached the car, Erin opened the back door for me. "You should sit up front," I told her, "next to your husband." She hesitated, understanding the small mercy behind the gesture, then nodded and slid into the passenger seat. Daniel looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Home?" "Yes," I said. "Let's go home." As the car pulled away, I watched the city through the window. Reflections of light streaked past like memories, fast, fleeting, beautiful. I thought of every insult I'd swallowed with a smile, every silence I'd carried like armor, every kindness I'd given without receipt. They had all led here, to this gentle quiet. At a red light, Erin glanced back at me. "Mom," she said softly, "thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled. You can't give up on people who are still trying. The light turned green. We moved forward, smooth and certain. By the time we reached my house, the sky had begun to clear. I stepped out, the cool air kissing my cheeks, the smell of wet asphalt mixed with night jasmine from my small garden. I looked up once more at the faint moon, hiding behind thin clouds. It reminded me of myself, soft, constant, content to shine without applause. I turned to wave at them, my hand steady, my heart lighter. When the car disappeared down the street, I stood for a moment on the porch, listening to the quiet. The same quiet that had once made me feel invisible now felt like proof of everything I'd learned. That calm isn't what you find after the storm. It's what you build during it. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let it close gently behind me. The echo sounded like closure. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like someone who had endured the world. I felt like someone who had taught it, softly, how to behave. The next morning, the world was washed clean. Sunlight stretched through my curtains, quiet and golden, slipping across the kitchen floor like it was looking for me. I stood barefoot by the counter, pouring the first cup of coffee. The smell filled the room, dark, familiar, honest. When I brought the cup to my lips, the steam brushed my face the same way candlelight had the night before. I remembered the laughter at that dinner, the too sweet kind that hides judgment. I remembered the whisper, sweet but poor. It had bruised something inside me, but only for a moment. Because bruises heal when truth remembers your name. Luis had remembered mine. And through that, everyone else had been forced to see what I had always known. That quiet worth is not invisible. It just waits until the noise tires itself out. I sat by the window, looking out at my small garden. Drops of rain still clung to the petals, shimmering like they had their own light. It reminded me of the marble wall I'd touched on my way out, cold and smooth, veined like a living thing. Both carried proof of time. One planted, one carved. For years, I had thought dignity meant keeping your head high no matter what. But maybe it's gentler than that. Maybe dignity is knowing when to lower your head, just enough to listen, to others, to life, to your own heartbeat reminding you that value isn't loud. Erin called that afternoon. Her voice was softer, her laughter unforced. She said Daniel was making coffee and that they were talking, not just performing conversation, but really talking. "We want to visit you this weekend," she said. "Bring yourselves," I told her. "That's all that's ever been missing." After we hung up, I stepped outside. The ground was damp, the air sweet. My neighbor waved from across the street, and I waved back, thinking how simple connection can be when you stop trying to earn it. I took another sip of coffee, and the warmth spread through me like memory, like home. For the first time, I realized how much strength there is in softness, how the same hands that scrubbed tables had built a life that no insult could tarnish. I thought of that first night decades ago, the broken glass, the whisper, the smile I'd forced. I smiled again now, but not to hide, to bless, because dignity doesn't shout. It lingers, it teaches, it forgives. And that night, it finally had a name. Mine. True wealth has nothing to do with fortune. It's the quiet certainty that peace, once earned, can't be taken. If this story found a place in you, let it rest there a while. From where are you hearing my voice tonight? Write your city in the comments. It's beautiful to see how far our stories of dignity can travel.